Welcome back. Activist group Stand With Us has launched a social media campaign in the lead up to the Palestinian mass protests on the Gaza border with Israel tomorrow. Called #StopTheStorm, the digital campaign in both English and Arabic points the finger at the ruling party of the Gaza Strip, Hamas. Now you're looking at one such example of its campaign in a Facebook post published today, accusing it of using local civilians to carry out what it calls a violent and extremist agenda. I'm joined in studio by the digital director from Stand With Us, Emily Schrader, as well as i24 News senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qassem. Great to have you both with us. Emily, talk us through the fact that the protests, of course, as we heard before the break, have widespread Palestinian support. We spoke with a Fatah spokesperson from the West Bank who supports these protests on the Gaza border. Talk us through then why you're pointing the finger directly at Hamas.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that Hamas is the ruling party in the Gaza Strip. And as we've seen in recent weeks, Fatah doesn't have so much influence in the Gaza Strip with the attempted assassination of the Prime Minister. And there's been a lot of internal fighting for years. In addition to that, we've seen similar protests organized by Hamas, just like this one initially, that were indeed violent. Just a few weeks ago, we saw a similar protest where we had attempted infiltrations, where the Palestinians threw pipe bombs at the IDF soldiers. They threw Molotov cocktails, throwing rocks. These are not non-violent protests. And additionally, this protest in particular, it was reported that Hamas has funded already $10 million to Palestinian civilians to go out and protest. And I just want to add one more thing about the protest. There isn't freedom to protest. They don't really have a choice. If this is something that Hamas is encouraging, even if there is widespread support, that doesn't necessarily mean it's what the Palestinians
Why do you say that? Why do you say there isn't
want.
A choice? Are you saying that if Hamas doesn't encourage these protesters, they wouldn't go out independently?
Maybe. But I'm saying that we don't know exactly what the Palestinian people want because there isn't a choice. When there was a protest for students' rights just a few days ago, Hamas responded to the protest by beating the protesters. This isn't a place where there's freedom of choice, freedom of assembly.
All right, now the organisers of this particular protest say that the Land Day protest and the 6-week tent demonstration is a form of peaceful resistance. Now you're calling it a violent media display. Why is that?
Well, I think when you're calling to infiltrate the border of another country and you're also doing something that has already been done, as I stated in recent weeks, with throwing pipe bombs, throwing Molotov cocktails. I mean, we've seen even in the way that they act, and also the fact that this is sponsored by Hamas, which is a recognized terrorist organization in the United States and in multiple European countries. We know what they're getting at. And honestly, I don't want to see Palestinians suffer. I don't want to see Palestinians get injured. Israelis don't want to see Palestinians get injured. We certainly don't want to see IDF soldiers get hurt. But the person who has something to gain, so to speak, by Palestinians being hurt is the Hamas leadership and the Palestinian leadership. And that's why we are targeting Hamas in this cynical campaign to put Palestinian civilians on the front lines.
Now, as we mentioned before, parties like Fatah and also the Popular Front, they're also supportive of these demonstrations. Do you have a different message for them?
I don't have a different message for them in that, if they are supporting these protests and Hamas, they are also supporting violent resistance. And we know, they know, and we know that this is going to result in violence. And in supporting that, Fatah is aligning themselves with that. And that's a real problem for the future prospect of peace.
Emily Schrader, we really appreciate that insight here on Perspectives. Welcome back to Perspectives. Thanks for staying with us. We are continuing our conversation ahead of those mass protests planned for the Palestinian territories beginning tomorrow and lasting for 6 weeks until Nakba Day in the middle of May. I'm still joined in studio by digital director from advocacy group Stand With Us, Emily Schrader, and i24 News senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qassem. Emily, before the break we heard a journalist from Gaza City saying that these protests will not be violent despite reports from the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, that it could get violent and that they're being given permission to use live fire to protect Israeli lives. They say they'll be positioned far back from the Gaza border fence. What's your response to that?
Well, today already we've heard that, several hundred, I think now it's up to 400 or so, have gathered at the Gaza border. And I also heard the journalist from Gaza mention that the Palestinians are keeping their distance, that they will be setting up these camps, I think he said 700 meters from the Gaza border. However, we know that when the IDF already fired at some of the instigators of these riots, it was because they were already at the fence. So I wish that what he was saying was correct. I wish that this was a peaceful demonstration for the future of a Palestinian state. However, we already know from what's already happened, and it hasn't even started officially, that that's not the case. So I don't hold out a lot of hope for the future of this protest being nonviolent, although I hope I'm wrong.